Tanks were once Russia's roar, iron beasts slicing through snow and steel, carrying with them the illusion of invincibility. For decades, they were not just weapons, they were symbols of power, of dominance, of fear. But now, they're bleeding. Russia is bleeding. Not just on the battlefield, but in image, in pride, in silence. 3,000 tanks lost. Not hidden, not denied. Laid bare under satellite eyes, torn apart by drones, abandoned in fields like carcasses of a past that no longer commands respect. The myth is collapsing. Slowly, painfully, undeniably. This isn't just about destroyed metal. It's about a machine that was supposed to crush, now rusting under the weight of its own myths. It's about a superpower exposed, fragile, frantic, and failing. And you're about to see why. Because once the armor cracks, everything hidden beneath it begins to rot. Stay with me. The final truth will leave no room for illusion. There's something haunting about the silence that follows destruction. It's not the peace we imagine after war. It's emptiness. A field where there once was thunder, now holds only carcasses, twisted metal, burnt black soil, the smell of oil still clinging to the air, long after the battle has moved on. Over 3,000 Russian tanks have been reduced to wreckage. Not a symbolic figure, a documented reality, counted by satellites, confirmed by scouts, etched into the ground by fire. These machines, once the backbone of Russia's military pride, now lie gutted across the Ukrainian landscape. And with each tank destroyed, a piece of a myth dies. For decades, the world was told to believe in the invincibility of Russian armor. That no matter the enemy, no matter the terrain, these beasts would break through, crush resistance, turn fear into retreat. But now, the imagery has changed. Those same tanks are seen smoking in drone footage, immobilized, empty, defeated not by larger forces but by smaller, smarter ones. This isn't just a military setback. It's a symbolic unraveling, a collapse not of numbers, but of perception. Because when the world sees 3,000 tanks turned into scrap, it doesn't see strength, it sees vulnerability. The numbers are staggering, but more staggering is the truth they represent. These machines were never truly ready, poorly maintained, often crewed by undertrained soldiers, sent forward with broken logistics and unclear objectives. They weren't just lost, they were sacrificed. Each tank destroyed reveals a deeper truth. That raw power without precision becomes a liability. That mass alone cannot replace method. That intimidation built on outdated legends cannot hold against the sharp edge of adaptation. So yes, Russia still has tanks. But what it no longer has is the illusion, the psychological weight of superiority, the belief, both internal and external, that its forces are untouchable. And once belief dies, the real collapse begins. There are moments in history when power doesn't just shift, it shatters. And sometimes it's not by sheer force. Sometimes it's precision, intelligence, adaptation. The West didn't send tanks to match tanks. It sent something far more disruptive. Tools designed to pierce myths. Javelins, NLAWs, Stugna-Ps, drones, silent and sharp. These weren't just weapons. They were scalpel blades slicing through the thick armor of an old empire's pride. The Russian tank, once a symbol of unstoppable force, began to fall not in grand battles, but in ambushes. From tree lines, from apartment rooftops, from above, by drones no bigger than a suitcase. A billion-dollar military complex brought to its knees by weapons operated with a tablet. This isn't just about equipment. It's about a new kind of warfare. Decentralized, mobile, intelligent. Western systems aren't simply more powerful. They're agile, networked, designed to adapt in seconds. And they're in the hands of soldiers who've learned to think like engineers, not just warriors. And so, the battlefield changed. Tank columns once seen as impenetrable walls became corridors of death. Lines of advance turned into kill zones. And every explosion carried a message. Your time is up. But perhaps the most devastating blow wasn't physical. It was psychological. When Russian troops realized their armor didn't protect them, when the myth of the invincible tank melted away under drone footage and infrared targeting. What do you fight for when your strongest protection becomes your greatest trap? This isn't just technological superiority. It's a transformation in mindset. A war once measured by tonnage and steel now hinges on sensors and signals. Russia, still fighting with the weight of the past. Ukraine, and its Western allies, wielding the speed of the future. And the cost for Russia? Irreversible. Because once an army sees its machines fall, not by brute strength, but by invisible precision, doubt enters the ranks. And doubt, once seated, grows into hesitation, into fear. And fear kills faster than any missile. There's a peculiar kind of silence in abandonment. Not the silence of peace, but of neglect. Of something once valued now left to decay. Across Russia's vast landscape, satellite images reveal what words try to conceal. Hundreds of tanks, left to rot in open fields. Lined up like forgotten relics, stripped of dignity, exposed to rain, snow, time. They weren't destroyed in battle. They didn't fall to enemy fire. They were defeated by apathy, by mismanagement, by the slow corrosion of a system more concerned with optics than readiness. Imagine the weight of that image. Not a war zone, not a conflict, but a graveyard of potential. 1,000 tanks, still and silent, sinking into the mud. Each one a metaphor, each one a whisper of dysfunction. Their engines cold, their armor flaking, their promise unfulfilled. These are the reserves that were meant to reinforce the front, to show strength. Instead, they show something far more telling. Collapse from within. Because a military that cannot maintain its past cannot sustain its future. And when tanks are left exposed, it isn't just metal that rusts, it's trust, confidence, readiness. Poor storage isn't a logistical footnote, it's a strategic vulnerability. It's the kind of rot that doesn't make headlines until it's too late. Paint chips, rubber cracks, electronics degrade, and when war calls, these machines don't rise. They fail. Why are they abandoned? Why not cared for, protected, maintained? The answer is layered. Corruption that siphons budgets, commanders who prioritize appearance over effectiveness, an industrial complex overwhelmed, under-equipped, and disorganized. It's not a single flaw. It's a systemic unraveling. These rusting giants, once symbols of might, now speak a different language. One that says, "We were not ready." One that says, "We have been forgotten." And in their silence, they indict an entire structure. Because the collapse of a tank doesn't begin when it's hit. It begins when it's neglected, when no one checks the oil, when no one rotates the treads, when no one believes it will ever move again, and so they sit. Hundreds of them, rusting, waiting, not for war, but for the end of a myth. There was a time when the battlefield was ruled by noise. The thunder of engines, the quake of treads, the deep roar of cannon fire. But now, power moves in silence, above the trees, beneath the radar, with a quiet whir that signals something more terrifying than brute force: precision. Drones have changed everything. What once required an entire battalion can now be done with a single pilot, sitting miles away, watching through a lens, waiting. A tank that costs millions can be taken out by a drone that costs thousands. Not through chance, but through mastery. And that imbalance is not just tactical, it's existential. The Russian military, built around the doctrine of armored dominance, now finds itself exposed in the most literal way. Its tanks, massive and slow, are no longer hunters. They are targets, moving too predictably, visible from above, vulnerable at the seams. Ukrainian forces understood this early. They adapted. They listened to the sky. They learned that the greatest strength against steel is invisibility, intelligence, coordination. While Russian doctrine looked backward, to sheer mass and direct assault, Ukraine and its allies looked forward, toward asymmetry, toward agility, toward the digital battlefield. And so drones began to stalk the convoys, watching, waiting, striking, not just tanks but their lifelines, fuel depots, supply chains, ammunition trucks, each hit a ripple effect. One drone doesn't just destroy a vehicle, it disrupts an entire system. It's not just about destruction, it's about exposure. Drones don't just kill, they reveal. They lift the veil on training flaws, logistical holes, tactical stagnation. They show us, in high definition, what command generals try to conceal. And this is the irony. Russia, once proud of its armored legacy, now finds itself hiding from toys in the sky, from buzzing eyes that see too much, from strikes that don't just hit, they humiliate. The battlefield has changed, and those who cannot adapt are left behind. Because in this war, tanks don't lead, they follow. And often, they follow each other into fire. Every empire is built on stories. Stories of strength, of fear, of inevitability. Russia's military legacy was one of those stories, told through parades, monuments, doctrine. A legacy carried not just in weapons, but in belief. The belief that Russian might was unshakable, that its army, especially its armored divisions, could not be matched. But myths only live as long as they are not tested. And this one has been tested, not just by bullets or missiles, but by exposure, by reality. Because when the world watched Russian tanks burn in drone footage, when armored columns stalled for days without fuel, when outdated tactics met adaptive enemies, something deeper began to erode. Not just morale, but mythology. What we are witnessing isn't just a military underperformance. It's the unraveling of a carefully maintained illusion. For decades, Russia projected itself as the master of mechanized warfare. But the war in Ukraine has peeled back that facade, revealing not mastery, but decay. Poor coordination, inadequate logistics, aging equipment repainted to look new. Soldiers sent into battle with barely functioning gear. Tanks rolling into fields without air support, without maps, without purpose. These are not the signs of a superpower. These are the signs of a structure that looks strong from a distance, but cracks under pressure. And once a myth begins to crumble, its fall is swift, because myths are not defended with steel. They are defended with perception, and perception is fragile. This is why the loss of tanks matters so deeply, not just as a tactical blow, but as a symbolic fracture. When the most iconic element of your military identity is exposed as vulnerable, what remains? When the fear others had of you turns into doubt, or worse, into mockery, how do you recover? You don't. Not quickly, not easily, because rebuilding an army is one thing. Rebuilding belief is another. The myth is broken, and the silence left behind speaks louder than any speech ever could. Steel doesn't bend for ideology. It bends under pressure, relentless, unyielding pressure. And Russia's arms industry is cracking beneath it. War is a machine that devours. It doesn't wait. It doesn't forgive. It consumes metal, men, resources, time. For every tank destroyed, another must be built. For every missile launched, another must be assembled. But what happens when the factories meant to feed the war machine are choking? Sanctions have done more than freeze assets. They've frozen production lines. Microchips, precision components, imported tools, all suddenly out of reach. The arteries of Russia's defense sector have been clogged, and in their place, substitutes, improvisations, outdated stockpiles resurrected not out of strategy, but desperation. In theory, Russian factories should be roaring, working day and night to replace what's lost. But the reality is slower, quieter, and far more troubling. Some plants are producing a fraction of what's needed. Others are reactivating ancient assembly lines to refurbish tanks from the 1960s and 70s. Relics that belong in museums, not modern warfare. This isn't innovation. It's survival. And barely that. The numbers don't lie. For every tank destroyed on the front, Russian factories are replacing only a handful. The rest? Cannibalized, patched up, or sent to the battlefield incomplete. Soldiers are receiving vehicles with missing systems, broken optics, untested armor. This is not sustainable. Not for months. Certainly not for years. The illusion of endless capacity, of Soviet-era industrial might, is dissolving. The great war machine has gears missing, belts snapping, engines overheating. And the more it tries to accelerate, the more violently it shakes itself apart. This is what collapse looks like from the inside. Not with an explosion, but with exhaustion, with parts that don't fit, with welders running out of material, with assembly lines that stall while the battlefield screams for replacements. A military can lose tanks and recover, but when it loses the means to rebuild them, that is when the real defeat begins. When the official system fails, The unofficial begins to grow in its shadow, quietly, desperately, like weeds breaking through concrete. And in Russia's war machine, the cracks are now wide enough for black markets to flourish. With parts scarce, logistics broken, and factories overwhelmed, frontline units are turning inward, not to innovation, but to survival. Entire tanks are being stripped for whatever still works. Turrets removed, engines extracted, electronics pulled out and shuffled like contraband between battalions. This is not maintenance. This is scavenging. Imagine soldiers, not preparing for combat, but digging through scrapyards, peeling off armor plates, swapping out broken systems with pieces taken from older, barely functioning relics. Tanks once feared across Europe now reduced to Frankenstein machines, stitched together, barely alive, one shot away from collapse. And worse, this improvisation isn't coordinated, it's chaotic. What begins as necessity quickly spirals into corruption. Black market channels have emerged not just at the margins, but within military supply chains. Officers hoarding parts, units bribing logistics crews for priority, entire maintenance depots functioning like underground auctions. It's a theater of desperation, and everyone's acting. This isn't the strategy of a superpower. It's the behavior of an army cornered by its own illusions. The polished image shown to the world of freshly painted tanks and parade-perfect arsenals is a mask. Behind it, a reality patched with stolen wires, stripped bolts, and silence. The consequences are brutal. Cannibalized tanks are unreliable. Their systems are mismatched, their performance erratic. Soldiers don't trust them. Commanders can't plan with them. They are symbols not of strength, but of how far things have deteriorated. And perhaps the most telling sign is this: the enemy no longer fears them. Because when your most iconic weapon becomes something you build from scraps, behind closed doors, using whatever you can find, it's not just your army that's breaking, it's your story. Captured Russian tanks now fighting for Ukraine. There is no betrayal more poetic than a weapon turning on its maker. No humiliation more raw than watching your own steel, your own engineering, your own legacy, aimed back at you. Across Ukraine, captured Russian tanks are being resurrected, but not under the flag that sent them. These machines, left behind in retreats, abandoned in panic, or seized intact in battle, are now fighting for the very people they were meant to crush. It's more than irony, it's inversion, a reversal of intent so sharp it cuts through morale like a blade. Dozens of Russian tanks, in full working condition, have been absorbed into Ukrainian formations, painted over, repaired, redeployed. They move with new purpose now, not as symbols of aggression, but as instruments of defiance. And the symbolism is powerful, because a tank is more than a weapon, it's a message. When that message is captured and repurposed, it doesn't just change hands, it changes sides. It tells the world, we are not only resisting, we are transforming what was meant to destroy us into tools of our own liberation. It also tells Russian troops something quieter, something far more dangerous than gunfire. It tells them, your losses are not only physical, they are ideological. Your strength doesn't just fail to inspire fear, it inspires action against you. Your tools don't just break, they defect. And it spreads. Soldiers on the front hear the stories of tanks that switch flags, of vehicles once commanded by their comrades now rolling in enemy lines. And with every tale, morale erodes, doubt grows, faith in the mission dims. Because what do you do when your own weapons no longer believe in your cause? What happens to a military when even its machines begin to rebel? This isn't just loss. This is inversion of power, subversion of narrative, and perhaps the clearest signal yet that the collapse has already begun. It doesn't begin with explosions. It begins with silence, with the hum of a drone circling overhead, with the rust gathering on forgotten machines, with the realization that the fear once commanded by armor is gone. Russia's collapse is not just a military unraveling, it's a symbolic one. A slow, visible decay of a story that no longer holds. Over 3,000 tanks lost, factories overwhelmed, myths exposed, machines cannibalized, weapons captured and turned against their makers. It's not just a defeat on the battlefield, it's a retreat from relevance. Because this war has shown something more devastating than weakness. It has shown obsolescence. And when a system becomes obsolete, when its myths no longer inspire, when its weapons no longer intimidate, when its strategy no longer adapts, collapse is no longer a question of if, it's only a matter of when. So if you've watched this far, ask yourself, what else are we still calling power that's already dying in silence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Which of these signs do you believe marks the point of no return? And if this truly is the beginning of the collapse, what comes next? The battlefield is changing, but the deeper battle, the one for truth, for narrative, for history, has only just begun.